Hey, so in the last video, I talked about how to get set up with the toolkit and how to run it on your local device. So to do that, you needed to install Python and you needed to actually download the toolkits folder and its subsequent files and then run the installs and then actually run the application itself. So in this video, I'm actually going to walk through a bit of the code of the toolkit, how you can change it, and what that actually looks like in terms of a workflow. So to do that, I'm just going to do a real world example here and add some functionality to the toolkit. So why don't we get started by opening up that toolkit folder and we will take a look at what we have. So if I go back to the virtual power plant download and Flask app, now the first thing you're going to want to have to actually work on development for the toolkit, which is a Flask application in Python, you're going to want some sort of IDE. So you want some code editor. Now, I like to use VS Code, um, which is free to use, free to download for Windows, Mac, um, and Linux. But you can also get like PyCharm, which is the JetBrains Python IDE. But for this video, I'm going to be using VS Code. If you really want, you can also use like some older style editors like Emacs or Vim, but I think it's just best to use VS Code. So if I do that, I go to the Flask app folder. I can open with code. One thing I should mention is I use version tracking. So I save my changes to GitHub. And you can use the VS Code terminal, but I actually use git bash to make all my track all my changes to the code and the repository. So you can download Git or Git bash through this or through your terminal. Um, and it also just helps because you can open up a Git bash terminal actually in the folder and put bash codes here so you can see what's going on. Yeah, let's actually look at the code of the toolkit. So all the code is in the app Python file that's just in the Flask app folder. So kind of how these Flask apps work is you have different HTML pages. In this case, I have a base page that just shows on all the other pages what the base should be. So in this case, it's like the top bar with all the pages and then kind of just like the style guide for each page. But then we have each of the other pages there. So Solar has everything you want on the Solar page. It's all done in HTML with Jinja extension for Flask. So how that works is we pass in these variables into HTML and you can just display that. So I'll show a bit of that once I actually get into the code as well. But so let's say we want to run it from VS Code, the Flask app, I mean. We can go view, terminal. I'm just going to clear this. So then you can run Python and then app. So then it'll take a second to load, but then we actually have our toolkit. So that's great. So why don't I split this with this so you can see both of them at the same time. So if I So if we go to our app, we can see at the top we have all the installs that we need, all the libraries for the actual code itself. And the way that Flask works is we have a defined function for each one of the pages. And to pass variables or data to each of the pages from another, you actually have to do this get and post method. So that's when you see on the top here in these headings of the function, you'll actually see the methods get and post. So you can actually retrieve and post data in these things called sessions. Now, it's definitely useful to look up Flask tutorials online to actually understand how to use the Flask web application framework in Python, and they have some different tutorials that you can get set up pretty quickly on. So, I mean, the toolkit itself has some pretty simple inputs with just like these text boxes and drop-down menus and different sliders. And if you actually go to the home method, so that's this one here, that's the root directory, you can see um, how you get the actual data from the user. So this is this request form.get. And that's just the Flask document or styling syntax for this actual form, this inputs on the home page. So you can see that's how it works. And if we go to the home HTML, you can see after we go past the styling sheet, you can actually see the different types of inputs, whether it's a number in a um, in like a text box or whether it's a drop down. Um, yeah, we have different like drop down boxes or different here we have the slider, and that's all just like vanilla HTML code. You can see, so say you wanted to add some disclaimer to the top of the virtual power plant, you could add a paragraph like so. You could say update this. Now, if we actually save it and we reload the application, you'll see that it pops up there. So that's like the simplest change you can make to the code is just adding like different HTML, like text, adding it to the page itself. Um, okay, so then why don't we actually look at something useful? Say we want to um, make some sort of real change within the app. So one thing that could be useful is having a buyback pricing on the actual HTML page that the user inputs as a text box. So we could go to, and why don't we put this buyback pricing at the very end? So we could go past battery inputs and before submit and say I want to have it spaced out. I'm going to put some breaks after, and I will do this for the same, to make it the same size as the other ones, and I'll call it buyback pricing. So again, if you reload it, you'll see. If I save it and do that, you'll see buyback pricing. So that's actually down a bit too far. Why don't we remove that? There, looks good. So then we want to add an input box similar to the surface area. So, or the number of wind turbines. But we do want to be able to have it as this. So why don't I copy this? And paste it there. So we'll call it buyback price. Okay, so now we have another input called buyback price. Oh, and I don't want the meter squared. We should call it dollars CAD. So now we have an input box here, but we're not actually fetching it in the application itself. So say we wanted to fetch it in the app, we would go here, and just like we fetch all the other stuff, we would write session and then buyback price and then request form get, buyback. Oh, buyback price. And I'm actually going to change this to that to make it different so there's no confusion. It follows the same syntax that I've been using. And then we want it as type float to make it a decimal point number. Okay, so then I can actually check whether that worked by sending or getting this on a different page. So if I actually want to show this buyback price on a separate page, well, first let's just make sure we didn't break anything. So we can input some solar inputs and a buyback price of 0.3. So it made a valid point that it needs to be from 0 to 1. So that's not what we want. So let's go back to home and look at the buyback price. I think if we change this to float, let's change 0, 1. Okay, so it looks like that worked. Now let's just put the buyback price as part of the inputs here. And eventually we can make it so that our calculations actually work with that buyback price. So if we go to Solar HTML, let's add a row on the table called buyback price after tilt. So if we want to just copy the tilt row, and we can call it buyback price in CAD. And then we don't know what the variable is going to be called yet when we get it in our code, but let's just do that now. So if we go to Solar, we can see these session gets. So we want to do the same thing for buyback price. And let's go up here and actually copy this. And in order to send things from Flask to HTML and load it on our screens, what you want to do, and you can see it's not used here because it's not in the same color, but it's at the very end, you return it to the HTML page. So the Solar function is quite long, but at the very end, you'll see all these things that get returned. So we can simply add to that by saying buyback price equals buyback price. Now the HTML script through Jinja has the ability to use that buyback price variable. So I just need to get back to here. So now here I can simply put buyback price. And if we reload our Solar page, we should have the buyback price. So that's an example of how you can use Flask to update your workflow. Now that I'm actually making updates to it, what I can also do is go back to Git Bash, say Git status to see what the status is. You can see we made these edits. I can then go git add to stage them, git commit with a message, added buyback, and let's call it static since we're not using it for anything else, and then push it to Git. And we'll see when we actually go to our Git repository, we can see that it actually worked. I like to just do this as a check. So virtual power plant, and it says updated just now. And that should be in Flask app. And we should see the actual update with the name added buyback price. So perfect, that worked how we wanted it to. So yeah, that's the workflow for updating Flask items and making edits in code. Um, all the calculations for each of the subsystems are done within their respective functions, or you can think of it like their respective pages. And all of that gets passed from Python to HTML to display it. All the plots are done using Plotly, which is very similar to Matplotlib, except it has the ability to be shown in HTML and it's inline. So on all those, it's a very simple syntax. All you do is show plots like this, and you pass them as the variable, like I just showed with the buyback pricing. So we have some really easy abilities to do things like that. Yeah, so I hope this tutorial was helpful, and I hope that the toolkit continues to be a great tool for the clean energy production and virtual power plants. Thanks so much.